Welcome to Nexus Prime, the most prestigious space station in the galaxy, where beings from across the cosmos come to watch other beings stab each other with really expensive knives. And no, that's not a euphemism. The Intergalactic Blade Mastery Tournament happens once every galactic cycle, which is roughly equivalent to 4 Earth years, assuming you care about Earth time, which most of the galaxy doesn't. The tournament draws the finest blade masters from 17 different species, all eager to prove that their particular brand of sharp metal is superior to everyone else's sharp metal. Standing at the center of the grand arena, polishing his collection of quantum-forged blades, was Keth'var the Eternal Slice. Yes, that was his actual title. The four-armed Zelonian had held the championship for 200 consecutive years, which was impressive considering most species barely lived that long. His blue-scaled skin gleamed under the arena lights, and his forearms moved in perfect synchronization as he performed his pre-tournament blade meditation. Another year, another collection of inferior beings to humiliate, Keth'var muttered to his training partner, a three-eyed Vorthan named Glixnor. Have you seen this year's roster? Pathetic. Half of them are still using monomolecular edges. Monomolecular. Can you believe it? Glixnor nodded sagely, though he secretly thought Keth'var was a bit of a pompous ass. Indeed, Master. Your tri-quantum resonance blades will surely what? Win? Of course they'll win. They're forged from compressed starlight and tempered in the core of a dying neutron star. These peasants bring kitchen knives to a Blade Masters tournament. Speaking of kitchen knives, at that exact moment Marcus Rodriguez was standing in the registration line, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Mac, as his friends called him, was a short-order cook from Detroit who had somehow ended up on an alien space station, holding his grandfather's old chef's knife and wondering if his life insurance covered intergalactic incidents. Next, called out the registration official, a blob-like creature whose name was apparently unpronounceable by human vocal cords. Let's call him Gary. Hi, Mac said, approaching the desk. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm supposed to be here for the cooking competition? Gary's 17 eye stalks focused on Mac with the intensity of someone who dealt with this exact situation 12 times already today. Species? Human. Weapon of choice? Mac held up his knife uncertainly. This? Forged signature? Made in China? Gary's eye stalks writhed in what might have been confusion or disgust. Registration fee? Look, I really don't think I'm supposed to be here. I was trying to register for the Galactic Culinary Championships on Deck 7, and somehow I ended up. Registration fee is 500 galactic credits or equivalent biomass. Knife appears to be standard carbon steel composition, primitive but acceptable under Tournament Regulations Section 47-B. Max stared at the alien. Did you just call my knife primitive? Yes. Next. Now wait just a minute. But before Mac could finish his protest, a tournament official with far too many arms and an officious attitude appeared. Problem here, Gary? Human wishes to register for Blade Mastery Tournament with antique Earth steel. The official's mandibles clicked in what Mac assumed was laughter. Earth steel? Is he serious? Has anyone explained to him that we're not running a museum exhibit? Mac felt his Detroit attitude kicking in. Hey buddy, this knife has been in my family for 3 generations. It's cut through everything from Thanksgiving turkeys to what? Vegetables? How adorable. The official turned to Gary. Let him register. The crowd will love watching a human get dismantled by actual blade masters. It'll be over in 30 seconds. Gary stamped a form with what appeared to be a tentacle. Registration complete. Preliminary rounds begin in 6 hours. Try not to die immediately. It's bad for ratings. Mac walked away from the registration desk, still trying to process what had just happened. He pulled out his phone, somehow relieved that it still got signal in space, and dialed his sister. Hey Carmen, it's Mac. Yeah, I'm still on the space station. No, I didn't find the cooking competition. I accidentally registered for something called a Blade Mastery Tournament. What? No, I don't know what that means either. I'm pretty sure it involves knives, though. 6 hours later, Mac found himself in what could only be described as the galaxy's most intimidating locker room. Alien warriors of every conceivable shape and size were preparing for battle, and each one looked like they could turn Mac into human confetti without breaking a sweat. In the corner, Keth'var was performing what appeared to be an elaborate religious ceremony with his blades. He held each weapon aloft, speaking in ancient Zelonian, while his forearms moved in perfect synchronization. The blades themselves were works of art, gleaming edges that seemed to bend light around them, handles wrapped in what looked suspiciously like dragon leather, and energy fields that hummed with barely contained power. "Behold, my faithful companions," Keth'var intoned, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Today we face the unworthy, the untrained, the laughably inferior. Grant me the strength to end their suffering quickly." Mac, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how to put on what he assumed was some kind of protective gear. It looked like it was designed for someone with 3 arms and a tail, which he decidedly did not have. "Excuse me," he said to a nearby contestant, who appeared to be part octopus, part refrigerator. "How do you?" The alien turned and fixed Mac with 8 different eyes, each one expressing a different emotion ranging from pity to amusement. "You are the human?" "Guilty as charged. I am Thorgrim, the tentacled terror of Titan 7. I have conquered 17 worlds with my plasma-edged scimitars." "That's nice. I'm Mac. I make really good pancakes." Thorgrim's tentacles writhed in what Mac hoped was friendly amusement. "Human, do you understand what you have entered?" "Honestly, not really. I was supposed to be making fusion tacos for the Galactic Culinary Championships, but apparently I filled out the wrong form." "The Blade Mastery Tournament is not a cooking competition, small human. It is a sacred trial of combat where the greatest warriors in the galaxy test their skills against one another." Mac looked around the locker room, finally noticing the various weapons being sharpened, charged, and calibrated. "Oh, that explains why everyone looks so stabby." Meanwhile, in the arena, the tournament announcer was trying his best to hype up the most lopsided competition in galactic history. Zen-Teroth the Magnificent, a purple-skinned alien with a voice that could shatter glass, stood at the center of the arena addressing the crowd. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary life forms. Welcome to the 423rd Intergalactic Blade Mastery Tournament. Today we witness the clash of the galaxy's greatest warriors." The crowd roared approval, which in this case involved a lot of screeching, clicking, and what sounded like several air horns. In the red corner, defending his title for the 200th consecutive year, wielding the legendary tri-quantum resonance blades forged in the heart of a dying star, the Eternal Slice himself, Keth'var. More roaring. Several beings in the crowd held up signs written in languages Mac couldn't read but assumed said something like "slice them all." And in the blue corner, representing the backwater planet Earth, wielding what appears to be a kitchen utensil, Marcus Rodriguez. The crowd's enthusiasm died so quickly you could practically hear it hit the floor. Someone in the back yelled something that the translation software diplomatically rendered as, "Is this a joke?" Back in the locker room, Mac was on the phone with his sister again. "Carmen, I need you to listen carefully. I think I accidentally entered some kind of gladiator tournament. No, I'm not kidding. There's a guy here with 4 arms who's been sharpening knives for 2 hours straight. Another one looks like he's half shark, half tornado. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." He paused, listening to his sister's response. "What do you mean, fight them?" "Carmen, I flip burgers for a living. The most dangerous thing I face at work is the occasional grease fire." Another pause. "You want me to pretend it's like cutting vegetables?" "These aren't vegetables, Carmen. These are aliens who've been training for centuries to be really good at stabbing things." Mac looked down at his grandfather's knife. It was nothing special, just a simple chef's knife with a wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use. The blade had been sharpened so many times it was noticeably thinner than when it was new, and there was a small chip near the tip from that time his grandfather had tried to open a can with it. You know what? You're right. It's just cutting. I've been cutting things my whole life. How different can it be? Very different, as it turned out. The first round of the tournament was designed to thin out the field from 64 contestants to 32. Mac watched from the sidelines as Keth'var faced off against a crystalline being from the Andromeda sector, who wielded what appeared to be lightsabers made of pure sound. This should be interesting, Mac muttered to himself. It wasn't. Keth'var moved with forearmed precision, his quantum blade slicing through his opponent's sonic weapons like they were made of paper. The entire fight lasted approximately 15 seconds and ended with the crystalline being surrendering before Keth'var could reduce him to gravel. Your turn, human, announced a tournament official who looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a filing cabinet. Max stepped into the arena, still not entirely sure what he was supposed to do. His opponent was a hulking creature covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating, wielding a massive two-handed sword that crackled with electrical energy. I am Bruticus the Bone Crusher, the creature announced. I have slain 1,000 warriors with my thunder cleaver. I'm Mac replied. I make a really good grilled cheese sandwich. The fight began with Bruticus charging forward, his massive sword crackling with energy. Mac, operating purely on instinct, did what he'd done 1,000 times when dealing with an overheated grill. He stepped to the side and let the dangerous thing go past him. Bruticus, not expecting his opponent to simply sidestep, crashed into the arena wall with a sound like a small earthquake. While he was stunned, Mac found himself standing behind the creature, his knife somehow positioned near what he assumed was a vital spot. Do you yield? Mac asked, because that seemed like the polite thing to do. Bruticus looked around, realized his precarious position, and nodded. I yield. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Mac looked up at the announcer's booth, where Zen Teroth was frantically shuffling through his notes. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Rodriguez advances to the second round with what can only be described as a tactical maneuver. Mac walked off the arena floor, still not entirely sure what had just happened. He pulled out his phone. Hey Carmen, I won. I don't know how, but I won. The big guy with the electric sword ran into a wall. No, I didn't push him. He just ran into the wall. The second round featured 32 contestants, and Mac found himself matched against a 6-armed insectoid creature, whose name was apparently a series of clicking sounds that the translator gave up on, and just called contestant number 17. This fight went even more strangely. The insectoid attacked with all 6 arms simultaneously, wielding what appeared to be vibrating daggers. Mac, remembering his training from the kitchen, treated it like he was dealing with 6 different orders at once during the lunch rush. Step to the left to avoid the first attack, duck under the second, parry the third with his knife, use his free hand to deflect the fourth, step back from the fifth, and somehow end up behind his opponent just as the 6th attack missed entirely. Yield? Mac asked hopefully. The insectoid, now thoroughly confused about how a human with one knife had outmaneuvered 6 vibrating daggers, clicked something that the translator interpreted as "This is impossible." I'll take that as a yes, Mac said. In the commentary booth, the tournament's analysis team was having something approaching a nervous breakdown. Zephyr the All-Knowing, a telepathic being whose job was to provide expert commentary, was telepathically screaming at his co-commentator. Grax, are you seeing this? Grax, a 4-eyed creature with 17 degrees in blade combat theory, was frantically consulting his notes. I don't understand what's happening. The human appears to be treating Mortal Kombat like he's preparing food. That's because he is preparing food. Zephyr's telepathic voice was getting higher. He's literally using knife techniques designed for chopping vegetables. But it's working. I know it's working. That's the problem. Meanwhile, Keth'var was watching Mac's fights with growing irritation. His own matches were proceeding exactly as expected. He would enter the arena, his opponents would realize they were completely outclassed, and they would either yield immediately or be defeated within seconds. But this human, this amateur with his primitive earth steel, was somehow advancing through the tournament using what appeared to be cooking techniques. It was insulting. It was absurd. It was completely contrary to everything Keth'var understood about blade mastery. "This cannot continue," he muttered to Glixnor. "The integrity of the tournament is at stake." "Perhaps the human is more skilled than he appears?" Glixnor suggested carefully. Keth'var's 4 eyes blazed with indignation. "Skilled? He's using kitchen knife techniques. I've been studying the blade for 300 years, and this human is treating the sacred art of combat like he's preparing lunch." "Well," Glixnor said, "he does seem to be winning." That was exactly the wrong thing to say. By the 4th round, word of the human's impossible winning streak had spread throughout Nexus Prime. Betting pools that had originally given Mac odds of approximately 50,000 to 1 were now in complete chaos. The tournament's corporate sponsors, who had invested heavily in Keth'var's certain victory, were beginning to panic. In the VIP section, a collection of well-dressed aliens was having what could politely be called a heated discussion. "How is this possible?" demanded Zorb the financier, whose species had evolved from something that looked like a cross between a lobster and a calculator. "We've run the statistical model 17 times. The humans should have been eliminated in the first round." "Perhaps our models were flawed," suggested his business partner, a gaseous being named Vex who spoke through a series of controlled chemical reactions. "Maybe Earth steel is more advanced than we thought." "It's not advanced." Zorb's claws were clicking rapidly, which was his species' equivalent of hyperventilation. "The metallurgical analysis shows it's practically primitive. Carbon steel with iron impurities. It's barely better than a sharpened rock." Meanwhile, Mac was in his assigned rest area, trying to explain the situation to his sister over the phone. "Carmen, I made it to the semi-finals. I don't know how, but I'm somehow one of the final 4 contestants in this thing." He paused, listening to her response. "What do you mean, how do I feel?" "I feel confused, Carmen. 3 days ago I was making hash browns at Mickey's Diner, and now I'm apparently one of the best knife fighters in the galaxy." That's not a sentence I ever thought I'd say. Another pause. "You want to know who I'm fighting next? Some guy named Keth'var. Apparently he's won this thing 200 times in a row. The other aliens keep looking at me like I'm about to walk into a wood chipper." Mac looked down at his grandfather's knife, which was looking increasingly shabby next to all the high-tech weaponry around the arena. "I don't know what I'm doing, Carmen. These other guys have been training for centuries with weapons that cost more than my car. I've got a 50-year-old chef's knife and a lot of experience making omelets." But as he spoke, Mac was beginning to understand something that the alien spectators had missed. Every opponent he'd faced had been technically superior, faster, stronger, and better armed. But they'd also been predictable. They'd trained for so long in formal combat techniques that they couldn't adapt when faced with someone who didn't follow the rules. Mac, on the other hand, had spent 15 years working in busy kitchens where the rules changed every 30 seconds. You learn to adapt, to improvise, to handle 6 different tasks simultaneously while keeping track of a dozen different orders and avoiding the various hazards that came with working around hot oil, sharp metal, and stressed-out coworkers. "You know what, Carmen? Maybe I do know what I'm doing. Just not the way these aliens think I should know." The other semi-final match was between Keth'var and a warrior priest from the Outer Rim named Vex Thul the Destroyer. Vex Thul was famous for his mastery of the 7 sacred sword forms and had never lost a match in 40 years of competition. The fight lasted exactly 6 seconds. Keth'var's 4-armed assault was so overwhelming that Vex Thul barely had time to draw his weapon before finding himself disarmed and defeated. As Keth'var walked off the arena floor, he locked eyes with Mac across the competitor's area. The message was clear: "You're next." Mac waved back cheerfully, which was probably not the intimidating response Keth'var was expecting. "Final match tomorrow," Mac said into his phone. "Yeah, I'm nervous. But you know what? I've been in worse situations. Remember when the health inspector showed up during the lunch rush and the fire alarm went off? This is just like that, except with more aliens and sharper knives." He paused, considering. Actually, on second thought, this might be easier. At least nobody's threatening to shut me down if I don't pass inspection. That night, Mac couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his grandfather, who had used this same knife to feed his family through the Great Depression. The old man had never fought in any tournaments or won any prizes, but he'd mastered the art of making something out of nothing, of feeding people with whatever he had on hand. Maybe that's what I'm doing, Max said to himself. Making something out of nothing. The arena was packed to capacity for the championship match. Beings from across the galaxy had traveled to Nexus Prime to witness what everyone assumed would be the most lopsided fight in tournament history. The betting odds had stabilized at approximately 30,000 to 1 against the human, which was still considered generous by most experts. Centeroth stood at the center of the arena, his voice booming through the massive speakers. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished life forms, today we witness the ultimate test of blade mastery. In the red corner, the defending champion, master of the tri-quantum resonance blades, winner of 200 consecutive tournaments, the Eternal Slice, Keth'var. The crowd exploded into cheers, screeches, and various sounds that Mac couldn't identify but assumed were enthusiastic. Keth'var strode into the arena like he owned it, his 4 arms moving in perfect synchronization as he drew his legendary weapons. The blades seemed to hum with contained energy, their edges so sharp they appeared to cut through the air itself. And in the blue corner, the impossible underdog, the amateur who has somehow reached the finals, representing the primitive world of Earth, Marcus Rodriguez. The crowd's reaction was more mixed this time. Some cheered, others seemed confused, and Mac was pretty sure he heard someone place a bet on how long he would last. The over-under appeared to be 90 seconds. Mac walked into the arena carrying his grandfather's knife, which looked even more pathetic next to Keth'var's quantum-forged masterpieces. The blade was nicked, the handle was worn smooth, and there was a small rust spot near the bolster that Mac had never been able to completely remove. "Human," Keth'var said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a fight, "I respect your courage in reaching the finals, but this ends now. Yield and I will make your defeat quick and painless." Mac looked at the 4-armed alien warrior, at the crowd of thousands of spectators, at the elaborate weapons that probably cost more than his annual salary, and felt something he hadn't expected: calm. "Thanks for the offer," Mac said, "but I didn't come this far to quit now." The fight began with Keth'var demonstrating exactly why he had been champion for 2 centuries. His 4-armed assault was a masterpiece of coordinated movement, each blade following a precise pattern designed to leave his opponent with no possible defense. The quantum edges sang through the air, creating a deadly web of steel that no warrior in the galaxy had ever survived. Mac did what he'd been doing throughout the tournament. He treated it like a really complicated kitchen emergency. When Keth'var attacked high with his upper arms, Mac ducked low like he was avoiding steam from a boiling pot. When the lower blades swept in from the sides, Mac stepped back like he was avoiding splashing grease. "Or impossible," Keth'var snarled, pressing his attack. His blades moved faster, the patterns becoming more complex, the assault more relentless. Mac found himself in the rhythm he knew from 15 years of short-order cooking. Step left, duck right, parry, deflect, keep moving, stay calm, watch for the opening. The arena around him faded away. The crowd noise became background hum, and he was back in Mickey's diner during the breakfast rush, handling 6 orders at once while 3 different people shouted at him. "You cannot defeat perfection." Keth'var roared, launching into his most devastating combination, the 17-cut Cascade of Infinite Doom. Mac, who had never heard of the 17-cut Cascade of Infinite Doom, responded with what he thought of as the Tuesday morning special. A series of movements he'd developed to handle the morning rush when 3 different customers wanted their eggs cooked differently, and the bacon was about to burn. Somehow, impossibly, his grandfather's knife found its way through Keth'var's perfect defense and came to rest gently against the alien's throat. The arena fell silent. 20,000 spectators held their breath. Even the various life forms that didn't breathe seemed to pause whatever they did instead. "Yield?" Mac asked, because it seemed like the polite thing to do. Keth'var stared at the primitive earth steel touching his neck, at the human who had just defeated 2 centuries of training with what appeared to be kitchen techniques. "That," the impossible situation he found himself in. I yield, he whispered. The crowd erupted. Max stepped back, still not entirely sure what had just happened. He looked down at his grandfather's knife, half expecting it to be glowing or humming or doing something appropriately dramatic. But it was just a knife, old, worn, and entirely ordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zenteroth announced, his voice somehow managing to convey both excitement and complete bewilderment, "your new Intergalactic Blade Mastery Champion, Marcus Rodriguez." Mac waved to the crowd, then pulled out his phone. "Hey Carmen, I won. Yeah, I won the whole thing. I don't know how either. I think I'm supposed to give a speech or something." The victory ceremony was a surreal experience. Mac found himself standing on a podium while alien dignitaries placed what appeared to be a very expensive crown on his head and handed him a trophy that was taller than he was. The crowd was still in various states of shock, celebration, and confusion. "I'd like to thank everyone for this incredible honor," Max said into the microphone, reading from notes he'd hastily scribbled on a napkin. "I honestly never expected to be here, and I'm pretty sure most of you didn't either. This has been the weirdest week of my life, and that includes the time I accidentally put salt in the coffee instead of sugar and served it to the morning rush." He paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. "I guess what I learned is that sometimes the best way to win is to not play by the rules everyone else is using. Not because the rules are wrong, but because maybe there are more ways to do things than we think." Meanwhile, in the VIP section, Zorb the financier was having what could charitably be called a complete nervous breakdown. 20 million credits, he kept repeating. 20 million credits lost because nobody thought to properly analyze primitive Earth metallurgy. His business partner Vex was trying to calm him down, but it wasn't working. "Perhaps we should commission a study," Vex suggested. "Clearly there's something about Earth steel that our scientists missed." What could they have missed? It's iron and carbon. It's the most basic metal alloy in the galaxy. As it turned out, that was exactly the problem. In the VIP section, Dr. Keth'var, the galaxy's leading expert on metallurgy, was explaining to anyone who would listen why Mac's knife had been so effective. "You see," she said, her tentacles writhing with excitement, "everyone assumes that purity equals quality. Our quantum-forged blades are molecularly perfect, every atom in precise alignment, every impurity removed, every flaw eliminated." She gestured toward Mac's knife, which was now being examined by a team of very confused scientists. "But this Earth steel, it's full of impurities. Carbon content varies throughout the blade, there are trace elements that have no business being there, and the crystalline structure is completely irregular." "So why didn't it break?" asked one of the scientists. "Because those impurities make it flexible. Perfect molecular alignment makes a blade sharp and strong, but also brittle. When Keth'var's quantum edges hit that irregular steel, they shattered like glass against a brick wall. The Earth knife absorbed the impact and kept going." One of the scientists looked puzzled. "But surely they knew this when they made it?" "That's the beautiful part," Dr. Keth'var continued. "They didn't make it perfect on purpose. They just made it the best they could, what they had. It's accidental perfection." Back in the arena, Keth'var was sitting in the corner, staring at his shattered quantum blades and questioning everything he'd believed about combat for the past 3 centuries. 200 years, he muttered to Glixnor. 200 years of training, of meditation, of perfecting my technique. Defeated by a cook with a kitchen knife. "Perhaps," Glixnor said carefully, "there is wisdom in simplicity. Wisdom and simplicity. I studied under the blade masters of 17 different worlds. I meditated with the warrior monks of the Crystal Peaks. I forged my weapons in the heart of a dying star." "And he learned to cook eggs," Glixnor pointed out. "Maybe that's harder than we thought." Mac, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how to get home. The tournament officials had offered him a suite on Nexus Prime, endorsement deals worth millions of credits, and his own reality show called Cooking with Champions. All he wanted was to get back to Mickey's diner and return to making hash browns. "I appreciate all the offers," he told the tournament director, "but I just want to go home. I've got a job to get back to, and Mickey's probably wondering where I am. But you're the champion, the director protested. You could be the most famous being in the galaxy. I make really good pancakes, Mac said. That's famous enough for me. The trip back to Earth was surreal. Mac found himself on a luxury star cruiser, still carrying his grandfather's knife and the trophy that was too big to fit in his luggage. He spent most of the journey on the phone with his sister, trying to explain everything that had happened. So let me get this straight, Carmen said. You accidentally entered an alien fighting tournament, beat a guy who'd been champion for 200 years, and now you're famous across the galaxy. That's about the size of it. And you're coming back to work at Mickey's Diner? Where else would I go? It's got the best hash browns in Detroit. When Mac finally made it back to Earth, he was met by a small crowd of reporters and what appeared to be several government officials who wanted to know everything about his diplomatic mission to the alien tournament. Mac politely declined most of the interviews and went back to work. How was your vacation? Mickey asked when Mac showed up for his shift the next morning. Interesting, Mac said, tying on his apron. I learned some new knife techniques. Good. We've got a full house for breakfast. Can you handle the morning rush? Mac looked at his grandfather's knife, thought about 4 armed alien warriors and quantum-forged blades and tournaments watched by millions of beings across the galaxy, and smiled. Then smiled. Yeah, I think I can handle it. 3 months later, Mac was back to his normal routine of flipping burgers and making omelets when he got a call from Nexus Prime. The tournament officials wanted to know if he was planning to defend his title next year. I'll think about it, Mac said, though he was already pretty sure what his answer would be. But I'm going to be pretty busy. We're expanding the menu to include alien fusion cuisine. He hung up the phone and went back to work. In the pocket of his apron, his grandfather's knife rested comfortably in its sheath. It was still just a knife, old, worn, and entirely ordinary. But it had done something extraordinary, and that was enough. The really funny part, which Mac only discovered much later, was that it wasn't even his grandfather's knife. He'd grabbed the wrong one from the kitchen drawer when he'd hurried to catch his flight to the space station. The knife that had defeated the greatest blade master in the galaxy, the weapon that had conquered quantum-forged perfection with primitive Earth steel, was a $50 special from a restaurant supply store that he'd bought 6 months earlier when his real grandfather's knife had finally broken. But that's a story for another day. Right now, Mac had hash browns to make, and in his experience that was more than enough adventure for anyone.